Good morning and good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our final Child Welfare Fellows webinar. My name is Gerard, and I'm a research analyst with the Child's Welfare team at the National Conference of State Legislatures. On behalf of NCSL, I would like to welcome all of you to today's webinar titled Addressing the Educational Needs of Children and Youth in Foster Care. In addition to our wonderful presenters today, I am joined by my lovely colleagues Nina Williams-Mbang and Kyle Ramirez. For those of you who don't know, the National Conference of State Legislatures is a bipartisan organization that serves the legislators and legislative staff from all states, commonwealths, and territories. NCSL provides research, technical assistance, and opportunities for policymakers to exchange ideas on the most pressing state issues. Today's webinar is a platform for information exchange. We are aiming to make our 60 minutes together as interactive as possible. Feel free to type your questions at any point in the Q&A box, which you'll see on the bottom left-hand side of the screen, and specify which speaker you're addressing your question to. To begin building some comfortability with the chat function and to also learn who is on the line today, I invite you to type in the state from which you're calling now. I want to briefly mention the resources. Above the presentation, you will see a couple tabs, one of them labeled Resources. Here you can find and download a PDF version of the PowerPoint. Another tab is labeled Speakers, where you can find and read the bios of today's speakers. You can access these tabs at any time during the presentation. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be available on NCSL's website within the week. Today's webinar is the second of two webinars that are part of NCSL's Child Welfare Fellows program. Because education and foster care are of interest to many, we've opened registration to a wider audience, including others that are not part of the Child Welfare Fellows program. However, since this webinar is a part of the Child Welfare Fellows program, we will prioritize and ask questions coming from our fellows first. On your screen, you can learn a bit about NCSL's Child Welfare Fellows program, which began last year. Our first class is composed of 22 legislators and 33 legislative staff, representing 17 different states. Participants were selected through a rigorous application process. Many were able to participate in a kickoff meeting in July, our final in-person meeting in November, and a webinar in January. Interested in learning more, I invite you to visit our website. Today we're going to hear from a national expert about some of the challenges facing the education system's attempts to serve children and youth in foster care, outline some strategies legislators can take to address these challenges, and previous successful efforts states have taken. We're pleased to have with us today Kristen. She is a current Assistant Director of Education Projects for the American Bar Association's Center on Children and the Law. Her work primarily focuses on youth transitioning from foster care, youth empowerment, and the educational needs of children in foster care. She has authored numerous articles and publications, including the Education Advocacy Chapter of the National Association of Counsel for Children's Textbook, Child Welfare Law and Practice. Prior to joining the ABA, Kristen served as a guardian ad litem as well as a legal mediator on domestic relations cases. Kristen obtained her JD from Indiana University School of Law and her BA from the University of Notre Dame. She is a member of the Illinois Bar. Representative Daphne Michelson-Janae is from the great state of Colorado, where she is the Vice Chair of the House Public Health Care and Human Services Committee. She has been a representative since 2016, and during that time, she has already been a finalist for 9 News Leader of the Year and the Rocky Mountain PBS Be More Award. In addition, Representative Michelson-Janae serves as a member for City Year, Goodwill, and Junior Achievement, where she teaches in a girls and boys juvenile detention facility. She is also one of NCSL's Child Welfare Fellows. And first, we have Representative Michelson-Janae, who is going to share some thoughts related to her implementation of House Bill 1306 in Colorado and give kind of a narrow scope of her experiences. Representative Michelson-Janae, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and it's an honor to be with you all today and talk about something that's very near and dear to my heart, creating a better opportunity for the future of our foster youth. When I stood in front of my committee of the whole, so all 65 members of the House chamber, I said to them, if our foster youth are not our children, as we are state legislators, whose children are they? And I believe that it is fully our responsibility to make sure that the outcome of their future is better. And what we were seeing is the 4-year graduation rate for foster care students in Colorado in 2017 was 23%. Let me repeat that for you in case you missed it. 23% of our foster care youth were graduating from high school in 4 years. And that was a 10% drop from 2016, when only 33% of foster care students graduated in 4 years. So we are looking at comparable rates where the graduation rate for non-foster students in 2017 is 81%. So the disparity is seen hugely. And we have in ESSA, in the Every Student Succeeds Act, we have this unfunded mandate that foster youth are to stay in their school of origin. So we decided, as we know, that one way that we can increase the possibility for graduation rates for foster youth was to keep them in their school of origin, because we're seeing them move around. If they have 2 placements, it's 3 school changes, 3 placements, 5 school changes, 5 placements, 8 school changes, and our kids are just bouncing and bouncing and bouncing. So what we did was we took money and we allotted it to the counties. And we said to the counties that you would reimburse the parent or the taxi driver or however we were able to fund getting kids transported to their school of origin, so that they would have access to somebody who knew them, a school counselor, a teacher, maybe a sibling. And we defined school of origin so that it was flexible enough to reflect the real life experiences of children and youth by allowing students moving into less restrictive settings, for example, a facility or into a public school, to return to a school where they had a meaningful history, and allowing students to progress with their peers after they reach the highest grade level of their school, for example, moving on to the neighborhood middle school from elementary school. So it was a great bill to be on, and I will tell you, we introduced it at the beginning of the session, and it took 119 days. We have a 120-day session. It took 119 days to pass, and even in the very last moments, there were attempts to kill the bill because of an amendment that got on in the Senate. And what happened in the Senate was a senator added an amendment that said school buses no longer have to communicate with districts before they cross into district lines. So a school bus from District A can pick up a student from District B without a prior arrangement with the school district, which is the norm right now. Colorado has a single subject rule. This law was taken to court after session, and the judge ruled that that amendment did not fit under the single subject rule. And this year I have to run a bill to separate that amendment from the bill. So it was all sorts of good fun and very exciting.
All right. Well, thank you for that insightful information, Representative. Next up, we'll now hear from Kristen from the American Bar Association's Center on Children and the Law. Kristen, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Gerard, and thank you so much to Representative Michelson-Janae. She made it work with her schedule to be able to provide her perspective, which I think is so important to hear directly from somebody in Colorado. I'm going to introduce myself and my project a little bit, but I will say before she gets off the line to go and vote that Colorado, in that bill in particular, it was worth those 119 days because we continue to hold it out as an example of exactly what's needed to support youth in foster care. So I'm so glad that you persevered.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate it. It's a good story if anybody wants to hear that last-minute story one day.
I know. I would be a willing audience, that's for sure. Could I ask you before, not to put you on the spot, but before you get off the line, would you mind sharing, what were, for another state who might be trying to do something similar, knowing how hard it was for you to get through, looking back on it, are there any takeaways of what you think really made the difference in terms of making the case?
Yeah, absolutely, and thank you for that question. We had the right people around the table. The counties really wanted this, and we were able to figure out, Colorado's a big, huge local control state, so we were able to figure out how to put the money in a pot, but let the counties manage that money so that the local control element was there. And I think it's really important, if you're going to take this up, that you remember that foster care youth do not have a lobbyist. And you're going to have to be the one to work that bill to the bone, because otherwise the money's going to go elsewhere. My biggest floor speech of the year last year was when I was trying to, we worked several different ways to get the money, and one way I was trying to get it was to get it out of the we have a very interesting budget process in Colorado. So I was trying to put a budget amendment on it, and I identified where the money would come from, but that money was conflicting with raises for anesthesiologists. Well, how many lobbyists do you think the anesthesiologists had? They bought up the whole lobby. And my own colleagues were voting for the money for the anesthesiologists instead of the foster youth. And I was devastated. We did end up finding the money elsewhere, thank God, but it took a tremendous amount of digging and coercing and begging to get it done, because foster youth don't have a lobbyist.
Thank you. That's exactly right, something that we find in our work as well, and why it's even more important that we have something like the Child Welfare Program, the Child Welfare Fellows Program. So I'm so glad to be here to talk with all of you today. So my name, as Gerard said, is Kristen Kelly. I am a senior attorney with the American Bar Association Center on Children in the Law. The American Bar Association Center on Children in the Law is a grant-funded division of the ABA. We're housed in Washington, D.C., and for almost 40 years we've been working to try and advance the rights of children and families. We have a wide variety of projects, ranging from focusing on the legal process, so attorneys, parent attorneys, children attorneys, and judges, and supporting them, as well as a variety of topics from kinship care to immigration, health, and, of course, the project that I'm here to talk about today, which is called the Legal Center for Foster Care and Education. For the past 12 years, I've been working on this project, and our goal is really to try and connect the child welfare, education, and court systems to work together to try and improve the educational outcomes of students in foster care. We do this through a variety of ways. We develop tools and resources. We provide training. We've been working at both the federal and the state level to work on policy for this area. But more than anything, it's trying to spread the word and get these systems to work together to support this vulnerable group of children. So before we get started, even though I know we're in a webinar format, and it's easy to sort of doze off, I wanted to take a chance to hear from all of you. Something brought you to this webinar today. Something interested you, or there's some question that you have or something that you wanted to learn. So I'm just going to give everybody 60 seconds. Please don't be shy. I hope that you can just type into the chat box just so that I get a little bit of a feel for what brought you here, why you're interested in this, or any questions that you might have. I already saw people type into the chat box, so I know that you're able to use that. So I'm just going to give everybody a minute, as I said, to just think it through, and please take a moment to type in what brought you here, or if there are specific things you want to make sure that we cover today. Ready? Go. Thank you so much, Madeline, for sharing that. I appreciate that. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to share? We've got a couple more seconds here before we move on. Thank you, Bridget. Great. Good question, Krista. All right, thanks. I appreciate that. Good. Well, this gives me some good perspective as to what brought you here. I appreciate that. I'm going to attempt to provide an overview today of some of the basic challenges that students in foster care face. Representative Michelson-Janae already talked about a number of them. So I'm just going to talk about the challenges and the need for this to be an area of attention and focused support. I'm going to provide a little bit of a national overview and an outline of some of the strategies that can be used. I know that's consistent with a few of the questions that you already raised, so I'm glad to hear that. I'm going to be providing some examples of some state legislation on a couple of different topics, and then I'm going to wrap up with selected tools and resources. I know that this seems to be a lot to cover for the 30 minutes that I'm going to be talking, but my plan is really to keep things at sort of a high level and then encourage you all to really ask questions for more detail, either in the chat box now or by following up after the call. So students in foster care have a wide variety of challenges based on being in the foster care system. The one that comes up over and over again and that Representative Michelson-Janae did such a great job of addressing is this concept of the lack of placement stability resulting in school instability. I know that before I started working with the child welfare system and was sort of outside, I was always under the false impression, as maybe perhaps many of you were, that when children and youth enter the foster care system, they sort of get placed into a foster family and they stay there for a while until they either return home or maybe adopted from another family. After working with the child welfare system, it's clear to me that placement instability is something that comes up over and over again, not just when they first enter the foster care system, but then throughout their time in care. And unfortunately, all too often, these living placement changes result in school changes. And I'm sure we can all relate from our own school experience or from our children's how challenging it is to move schools, not only because of the academic reasons of sort of losing courses and losing credits, but also the social reasons of, leaving your peers, having new teachers, having a new building, and all of the trauma that can cause. So one of the biggest barriers that students in foster care face relates to school instability. Of course, when they're changing schools, oftentimes there's delays in enrollment. So we were hearing over and over again about students in foster care having to sit out of school for long periods of time. And when they did move schools, having issues with their credits transferring and not being able to meet those graduation requirements. The situation in Colorado about the low graduation rate is unfortunately one that's consistent in other places as well, and a reason why we need to be giving such focused attention to this issue. There's also issues related to special education for students in foster care. The limited data that we have on this shows that there are very large numbers of students in foster care who are involved with special education. But we believe that this involves both an over-identification, that is, that some students are put into special education programs for behavior problems or things resulting from the trauma that they've faced that may not necessarily require special education. But on the other hand, we think that there's also many students who, because of their mobility or because of other reasons, are in need of special education services and are either not identified or not given those services. So challenges related to special education happen throughout the population of students in foster care. Students in foster care are also disproportionately suspended and expelled, and they oftentimes are disproportionately put into alternative education programs or residential programs. And across the country, most of these on-site programs, these residential programs, many have inferior education programs. Education is not prioritized, and so that's another barrier that these students in foster care face. So I've walked through some of the challenges. I'm including for you also a compilation that we've put together. This is the most recent version we released in April of 2018. but we've been doing it every 2 to 3 years for over a decade. And what it is a compilation of the research and the data that is out there related to students in foster care and their educational outcomes. This slide includes some fast facts related to their education, as you can see, and as I'm sure you've heard both anecdotally and from youth themselves. The numbers are not good. Students in foster care have lower graduation rates, higher dropout rates. Their reading levels and their academic scores tend to be lower than their non-foster care peers. And the most compelling data point to me on this is that the great majority of students in foster care, in fact, want to go on to post-secondary education. But then the numbers who are actually able to graduate and go on to post-secondary education and complete it are, in fact, quite low. So for all of these reasons, both the data and the challenges that we've talked about, this is an area that we need to really focus on, and these students need really targeted attention and resources. But I'm going to spend a couple minutes just showing a video that hears directly from youth, from foster youth themselves, about why this is such an important topic to focus on.
All the odds were stacked against me, Came from a single black parent, no mother, no father, foster child, bad attitude. I wasn't supposed to be here.
Education equals freedom,
inspiration, a better life,
the future.
Education equals the future.
Success, opportunity. In a sense.
Basically a backbone.
That delicacy.
Life experiences.
It's a gateway to the world.
My earliest memory of school was probably kindergarten. I hated it.
I'm terrified to walk into a classroom with 30 kids when the only children I've really interacted with is my sister.
I attended 5 different elementary schools.
My biological parents obviously didn't have any kind of education. My biological dad went to juvie.
A lot of foster youth, are self-conscious and believe, I was stunted as a child growing up, so I'm not as capable as other children or other adults. That's a lie. That's a myth. I'm just the same as you, and I'm here.
My 8th grade debate coach told me that, with your experience and with your character, you'll be able to help a lot in life. And he told me that he wouldn't give up on me, and he did it.
I had science teachers who would just sort of have me, instead of just telling me how the world was, the first thing they would do is they would ask the class to just sort of think about it.
As I moved on through grade school and elementary school, and eventually I reached high school, I really learned to love academics.
I used to love to read, and I used to love doing math. I used to do my times table like there was nothing else to do.
And one of my teachers said, "You're gonna go to college, and I'm gonna help you get there." And I'm here.
I enjoy college. It's hard, but it's fun to be here.
I traveled all over Europe. I never could have thought to aspire to do something so amazing. It's a lot of, foster youth out there that didn't probably get the chance to go to college or didn't choose to go to college. That's probably out there struggling. I don't want to be that person.
It's a lot of hard work, but then you meet so many great people, and I think honestly the people that you meet make college what it is.
And people are going to grad school and getting their masters, and I don't know people like that back home,
I see my friends as my family now, and I see the people that the people that show interest and the people that invest in my life. Those people are my family.
Creating your own mentors is something I would really recommend. Just sort of asking people who you really admire what it is that they do.
Cling on to the people who are positive in your life.
So ask for help. Don't be afraid to do that. Hang in there. Don't believe anything that anybody says about your potential unless it's good.
You're sitting here saying you can't do this, you can't do that. Well, how do you know? You haven't tried.
We're all a little broken. You just move on.
Keep pushing. Finish high school. Finish strong.
You definitely can, restart and do things better.
From the bottom of my heart, education is the key to get out.
You will feel even better because you can say, I came out from that and now I'm here.
My dream job would be to work with athletes.
I want to go to law school.
A social worker.
I see myself as a legislative aide.
I want to be able to make a difference.
I want to change the world. I have so many things that I want to do.
I want to be a teacher. It's going to impact it tremendously. I will forever be in school. And I
Great, thank you so much, and sorry I didn't see that the video was going. So I think that the video does a great job not only of laying out sort of the challenges that youth face, but also how critical education is. That was a bunch of interviews from an on-campus program in California, students who had graduated from high school and made it onto this program, and talking about what was most important to them. And that, to me, is the most compelling reminder of why we really need to focus on this, because it does make a difference, and it's so inspiring to see when you focus on these youth, what a huge difference and an impact it can make. So when we started our project over 10 years ago, the very first step we thought of coming up with was, if we were to focus on improving the system for students in foster care, what does that system need to look like? And we worked with a variety of people around the country who had been doing policies and programs on this topic, and came up with what we call the blueprint for change. And the interesting thing about this being over a decade old is that it's still relevant. And despite all the law changes and despite all the positive improvements that have happened over the year, that overall framework of what we need step by step to try and support students in foster care still remains. So I really encourage you to take a look at that. It surrounds 8 goals for youth. It's focused on what youth need. It doesn't have a particular audience in mind, so whether you're a policymaker or whether you're an educator or whether you're an attorney for youth, you can really sort of take a look at this, see what the goals are, and under each of the goals there's some examples of benchmarks of progress. So the Blueprint for Change importantly spans early education, so making sure that youth in foster care enter school ready to learn, all the way through both entering and completing post-secondary education. So it really spans that full spectrum. The interesting thing, I think, in working in this area is that it really can't be one system that does it alone, and it can't also be one area that does it alone. So in order to make this work, there really needs to be changes both to federal law and policy as well as state law and policy. There has to be practice change on the ground. There has to be collaboration between child welfare, education, and the courts. And then there needs to make sure that there's data as a central component, both to see where the challenges are and also where the progress and improvements are as well. So these all work hand in hand to make sure that there can actually be improvements in this area. The good news is that over the last 10 years or so, or more, there really have been some really very solid improvements in each of those areas, both federal and state policy, data, practice change, and system collaboration. I'm going to walk through just some of the examples that have happened at the federal law level, most notably around the school stability and continuity topic that we've talked about so often, about how important that is. I think that at the federal level, they understood that the very first step is making sure that students have the right to be able to stay in that same school and trying to set up the framework to do that. So in 2008, the Fostering Connections Act, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, included for the very first time the requirement that child welfare agencies work to support the school stability of students in foster care. And this was a big change because previously education hadn't been a main priority of what was required under federal law related to child welfare. So that passed in 2008, and child welfare agencies around the country began trying to, if they hadn't already, been making more of a focus on school stability. But they quickly learned that they could not do that alone, that it really takes close collaboration with the education system to be able to do that. And so importantly, in 2015, through the Every Student Succeeds Act, For the very first time, there are a lot more rights and protections specifically for students in foster care. And the reason that this is so exciting is because it's showing that through that federal child welfare law and that federal education law, that there's really a shared responsibility between these two systems to make sure that students in foster care are getting the rights and protections that they so critically need and deserve. So this slide outlines some of the key provisions relating to school stability in the Fostering Connections Act and the Every Student Succeeds Act. As you can see, they sort of work in tandem to make sure that both systems are at the table. If you aren't familiar with these two laws, towards the end of this presentation, I have a slide that includes some examples of a full toolkit that really kind of goes into all the details of the specific laws. The main components being really the right for students to be able to stay in the same school regardless of where they're living, and also making sure that they have the right to transportation. Similar to Colorado, the federal law sort of lines up what the requirements are, but then leaves it up to the states to really identify the best way for them to do it. I think there was a recognition at the federal level that the way that you handle school stability in Wyoming is going to be a lot different than how you handle school stability in New York. And so they really wanted to give the flexibility to make sure that with the way that their child welfare and education systems were structured, and depending on the needs of the youth in that state, that they could build a system that really supports each of them. The one thing that's important, I think, especially for all of you in your states, is to know that for the first time since 2015, there's now required within every state Department of Education a foster care point of contact. And that person is ultimately responsible for overseeing that the requirements under the Every Student Succeeds Act related to foster care take place. So if you haven't already, hopefully you are in contact with them, because that should be your main point of contact for these issues as well. The majority of states, also state child welfare agencies, have identified, even though it was not required under the Every Student Succeeds Act or Fostering Connections, they've realized how important it is to have someone housed within the state child welfare agency that also has a particular focus on education. And so the majority now have a child welfare point of contact as well. So within these two systems, those are really the people that if you're not working with already, that you absolutely should be reaching out to and trying to educate them and have them educate you as well. They're your partners in all of this. So I know a number of you asked about some examples of what states have done. Both pre-Fostering Connections and the Every Student Succeeds Act, there were many, many states that had legislation specific to students in foster care, some on school stability and continuity and some on some areas. I'm going to spend a couple minutes walking through three primary areas that there have been state legislation passed. The first being school stability and continuity, the second being post-secondary access and support, and the third being related to data and information sharing. But the truth is that there's really a wide variety of state legislative examples. So if there are other areas that you're interested in, please don't hesitate to ask me about those or type into the chat box. So related to school stability and continuity, as I said, both before the federal laws were passed and after, there have been a great number of states that have laws specific to trying to keep children in their same schools. I highlighted in the box Colorado, Nevada, New York, and California, not because they're the only ones, but instead because they do have very detailed laws on these topics and in some ways have been kind of leading some of this work over the years. I'm going to just talk about sort of the themes in each of these areas. Different states handle things, as I said, in different ways, and some have some components and not others. But the themes in terms of state laws related to school stability and continuity are, first of all, putting into state law that there needs to be a contact in the State Department of Education and a parallel person in the Department of Child Welfare. In some state laws, they've outlined what the roles and responsibilities for each of those people should be. Some also, the federal law requires that for school districts where the county child welfare agency has a point of contact, that there needs to be a parallel person within the school district. And some state laws have outlined what the roles and responsibilities of those local district liaisons should be as well. Many state laws have outlined what the process should be in terms of best interest decision-making. When I talk about best interest decision-making related to schools, I'm talking about the decision generally by the child welfare agency about whether the child should remain in that same school or whether it's in their best interest to move to a new school. And many state laws have outlined what those factors should be, who should be involved in making that process, and if there are disputes related to that process, what the dispute resolution process would be. Also, state laws, including Colorado, as you heard earlier from Representative Michelson-Janae, is talking about transportation. Transportation, of course, is the major cost that comes along with trying to keep children in their same schools, whether or not they're living in that same school district. And so because of this and because of how things are handled differently at the county and district level, some states have come up with sort of a default. If there's no agreement, one side, whether it be child welfare or education, will be responsible for paying. Some, the default is splitting. Some, like Colorado, have allocated a budget specific for this. And as I mentioned earlier, related to the dispute resolution process, oftentimes they include some type of a dispute resolution process related to transportation, because there can be issues not only in terms of individual students and what transportation they should receive, but also on a broader system level about how to actually allocate responsibility for paying for that transportation and providing that transportation. Many state laws have outlined a process for immediate enrollment. They may have some number of days, that they require a youth needs to be put back into school, and what the process should be for that, as well as what the process should be in terms of transferring those school records to make sure that the new school has all of that information. And then finally, a variety of states, consistent with the federal requirement that now every state Department of Education annually needs to disaggregate the academic progress and graduation rates of students in foster care. Many states have some version of this as well and have taken it to a step further to sort of outline exactly how that should be done and how the information should come from the county and district level to identify which students are in foster care. Okay, so the next area that a variety of states have passed laws on relate to post-secondary access and support. Again, I listed just a few states, but there are many, countless others that have some type of post-secondary access and support. When I say post-secondary access, also, I just want to be clear that I'm not talking only about colleges or universities. I'm really talking about any vocational program, community college, anything that happens post-high school. And what this means is sort of what supports and services youth need to both graduate from high school, to enter post-secondary programs, and then, of course, to complete those post-secondary programs. So I'm just going to outline some of the areas that some states have included in state laws or in state laws and programs that support students in foster care. The first is school stability plans. The concept here is for youth that are changing schools, having some type of a process in place in order to be able to look at their records, see which courses they've taken, and make sure that they're on track to graduation and are able to fill in areas that they're not on track. Along with that, of course, is the concept of youth-centered transition planning. Sometimes this begins at a particular age or a particular grade. Sometimes it's triggered if there's some type of a problem or the youth gets off track somehow in terms of their education. Sometimes it's just standard practice of the child welfare agency to do it for all students who are at a certain grade or in high school. The idea here is really trying to focus to work directly with youth to make sure that they're involved in their education planning and on track in terms of what their goals should be. Recognizing that students in foster care oftentimes have challenges, some states have created alternative graduation requirements. So that means if they've missed a specific course that a district might require, they might be able to fulfill that requirement in some other way. Or if they're short on credits for whatever reason because they've changed school district, they might be able to take some type of a test or complete the requirements in another way. One of the most important ways to ensure post-secondary success for students in foster care is to allow youth the right to remain in foster care over the age of 18. Right now, the majority of states do, in fact, allow this, and many are also in the process of raising that age to be able to provide supportive services. This has been one of the key ways to make sure that youth are able to both enter and complete post-secondary education, especially for those youth who would have been otherwise aging out of the foster care system. And the majority of states also now have some form of a tuition waiver or a scholarship for students in foster care, and that's in addition to the Federal Education and Training Voucher, or ETV program. And finally, many states have on-campus support programs at community colleges, and universities that are focused on assisting students previously or currently in foster care. They have a wide variety of different models, but the common theme in all of them is an on-campus support person, either in the financial aid office or the counseling office, that serves as a mentor or a contact for the students. The video that I showed you earlier was from a series of programs that have been going on a long time in California called the Guardian Scholars Program. They have a long history of providing supportive services to students on campus, and the youth who were interviewed in that video all were participants of that program. So the final area that I'm going to talk about in terms of state laws relate to data and information sharing. And I mentioned earlier that the Every Student Succeeds Act for the very first time now requires disaggregated data for students in foster care. This past December was the first time that states were required to release that, and already in our initial research, we've seen that a number of states have not done that. We expect that, as this requirement becomes more known to people and as they work on this, this will be something that a lot of states are really going to be actively involved in. But the reason why this is so critical is there has been no to-date national data on this. All of the data that has been out there has been more limited research studies. And so this will be really a way of raising the visibility of this critically important group of students and making sure that the child welfare system and the education system understand what their challenges are and are also able to track progress. A variety of state laws put that federal requirement into their state legislation just to make sure that the systems know what that requirement is and are working on that. Some also have more detail related to information sharing or confidentiality, how to make sure that those systems, that the state education system is able to identify who those students in foster care are to make sure that that data is both accurate and helpful for their use. There's also a variety of laws out there related to individual student data. So having caseworkers be able to access the education records of students in foster care, or allowing foster parents or other people working with youth to be able to access those education records. And similarly, there's a variety of state laws talking about making sure that schools are able to know which students are in foster care so that they can get them the support that they need. So Representative Michelson-Janae already talked through some critical strategies and themes. I just wanted to highlight a couple of other ideas, but I'd also love to hear from any of you working on this topic. What has worked with you? The one thing that we found consistently is that for states who have been able to pass legislation specific to the educational needs of students in foster care, Oftentimes, there were pre-existing collaborative relationships between the state child welfare and state education system. It wasn't one system or the other trying to get that legislation passed on their own. There's always been an example of a legislative champion. I think we heard from one, obviously, earlier today as one example, but somebody who understands these issues and can really sort of champion this moving forward. I love the way that she described there are not lobbyists for foster students, and that's exactly right. You really need someone who understands this issue and can move it forward. Data has been consistently a core component, so making sure that there's some way to sort of measure progress and see what the issues are. Having an ongoing infrastructure for collaboration is something that's been critically important, not just to get that legislation passed, but then to make sure that you have the right people at the table moving forward to continue that conversation and make sure that implementation is actually happening. All right, before we get to some of the questions and comments, which I would love to hear from, I'm just going to very, very quickly highlight a couple of the selected tools and resources. I know that this PowerPoint slide, these slides are going to be available to you, so all the links should be available after this call. The first I mentioned earlier, our project put together an ESSA state implementation toolkit. The idea here was to provide some sample templates and forms and some fact sheets to help people understand what the law says and what the law requires. We've already found in working with a variety of states that states have used versions of this to start, whether it be through getting their state guidance passed or trying to come up with local templates and forms. They're all adaptable, and so things that you could use in your own state very easily and adapt to work in your own jurisdiction. I've mentioned data a number of times on this call, and it's just something that's just so critically important. Linking data between child welfare and education systems is just a very difficult thing, but something that's so critically important. And a number of states, especially in light of the ESSA state report card requirement and disaggregating that for students in foster care, are going through this process right now. So this was, we brought together some of the top states who have been able to successfully link their data and do a little bit of sort of an outline of what's required, what the process should be, and what some of the hurdles to look out for are. And so we did this together with an education agency called the Data Quality Campaign. So I encourage you, whether your state's already in the process of doing that, has done it successfully, or hasn't even considered doing it yet, I encourage you to take a look at that and see some strategies for really moving that data work forward. I also want to highlight a publication that we put out through our ABA Center on Children and Law called Child Law Practice. In December 2017, we put out a whole edition specific to education, and there are a number of different articles in there. One talks about ESSA, as we've talked about earlier. There's also one specific to early education and post-secondary education, another one related to special education. And so if you are interested in this topic and you want to learn a little bit more, that's a great place to not only see some of the main topics, but also have links to additional resources as well. Okay, I've been talking for a long time, but I really would love to hear from you. What questions do you have? Do you have information or things to share from your own state? I'm always interested to learn about the good work that's going on around the country.
All right, well, we do have one question here. So who should legislators consider bringing to the table when discussing the educational needs of children in foster care or older youth who are formerly in care?
That's a great one, Gerard. And I don't know if anyone else has perspective on who they think is most critical to get at the table. I think just from my experience in facilitating work groups like this, it's I think oftentimes it's important, of course, to have people at the state child welfare agency and the state education agency, but I think equally important is making sure that you have those staff at the county level and the district level to make sure that their voice is included as well. I think also it's important, maybe more than anything else, to make sure that you have the perspective of foster youth themselves. So whether it's through either some type of an alumni board of foster youth through your state, or whether there's anyone that's connected with the state child welfare agency, making sure that you have the voices of youth, I think, is a critical way, not only in sort of framing your system design to make sure that it's meeting their needs, but also I think that the voices of youth are, in many ways, the most compelling way to get people to support the system change that's so critically needed.
Kristen, we have a question about managing IDEA regulations. Child welfare agents can't be EDMs for children in their custody, and the guidance under ESSA that allows the CWE to make the determination of if youth need to change schools when placement changes occur. Can you address that issue?
Are you on mute?
I apologize. Yes, I was. Thank you, Tricia. That is a very, very good question, and one that has been coming up around the country. I think what she is raising is the question of how, under the special education law, the IDEA, the child's caseworker is not supposed to be making education decisions for the child. And so how do you balance that with sort of the ESSA or the Fostering Connections requirement and the ESSA requirement that child welfare agencies are required to make the best interest determination? The way that we've seen most people handle that, and the reason why I think it's so critically important that there is state legislation or policy on this topic, is to really outline the individuals that need to be involved in that best interest decision-making process, even though the federal non-regulatory guidance under ESSA makes it clear that the child welfare agency is ultimately responsible. That doesn't mean that it's the individual caseworker who's making that decision on their own. Instead, the rights of the parents are critically important. The rights of the education decision maker or special education decision maker are critically important. And of course, the school's perspective as well. That's why there really needs to be a group process in outlining what those factors are, including any special education factors, I think is critically important to that process. Does that help, Tricia?
All right, well, we have another question here for you. So for states that provide tuition waivers or scholarships for college costs for former foster youth, do they also provide other assistance?
Generally, they do. I mentioned already the idea of having sort of an on-campus support person. There's oftentimes some type of a group meeting, so, the different students at that school will get together. They oftentimes have protections to make sure that students are able to live in the dorms during holiday breaks or things like that. Sometimes they set up a mentor program with people in the community or try and help with sort of job seeking or internships, things like that. And again, just in terms of purely financial support, oftentimes they have things set up in terms of trying to help with living expenses, textbooks, things like that. And states really handle it very differently, and also the on-campus programs handle it really differently. But yes, it's generally more than just straight tuition.
Oh, I was going to build on that, Krista, to ask, how do states pay for those pieces? I understand the tuition waivers are just that, tuition waivers, where the state public education entity is asked to waive the cost. But the other pieces, are those generally state appropriations? For the housing assistance, for example, I think that seems to be a critical thing. Young people, they get into college, but then they don't have anywhere to go over the summer or the break, and that is a real obstacle for them?
Yeah, great question, Nina. Housing over and over again comes up as the most important thing, it seems like, in terms of post-secondary success. And we've found that as now federal law allows for federal reimbursement for extending foster care beyond the age of 18, and then federal law previously had the federal Chafee program, which also provides those types of non-tuition supports. We've seen that a number of states have really sort of reoriented their funding structure and their resource structure to be able to use some type of state dollars as well as, federal matching dollars to be able to provide those non-tuition supports to students in foster care, housing being sort of front and center of all of that.
Great. Could you talk just a little bit more about the point of contact and the school liaison? You said that the child welfare agencies have one and the education agency has that person. Could you just describe just a little bit how that works?
Yeah, absolutely. And I have a list I can send to you also, Nina, that if you want to post it just so that people can have that as a resource. The Every Student Succeeds Act requires every state Department of Education to identify a point of contact for foster care. So every single state theoretically should have somebody housed within the State Department of Education who is that foster care point of contact. Additionally, the majority of states, although not required by federal law, have identified a parallel person within the State Department of Child Welfare. And so I don't have a list per se of that group of people. I do know for individual states people that we worked with, and if you want to know from your own state, you could reach out. I'd be happy to let you know who that is. But those are good partners in this process. I will say some of the people that have been identified in the state departments of education previously hadn't necessarily done work in the foster care arena, and so they're learning as they go as well. But the important thing is that there is someone that's housed there and that this is a huge resource for students in foster care.
I know we have only a couple of minutes left, but we have a question, and I had a question just about the transportation issue. It's certainly just sort of interesting or creative ways that states have, gone about trying to resolve that. I know about the MOUs between education and child welfare and the finance for transportation. We do have a question about navigating policies that only implement BID. I'm not sure what that is, for kids in their custody. So
yeah, best interest making. Yeah.
Best interest. Okay, that's what that is. So kids involved voluntarily or in kinship care placements where where a child is in custody with someone other than the child welfare agency. I guess the bids are not occurring in transportation as the shared cost is being denied or there's no process. And should these young people be covered under ESSA? So it sounds like states are encountering circumstances where this is not happening. We learned from Colorado, the legislature appropriated a lot of money to pay for transportation costs, but they haven't actually used much of the money. This was done in 2018. Just because the process seemed so cumbersome, the county departments were supposed to have created an agreement with all the school districts, and often there's several school districts, but no one's bothered to bill it, and it's just been so difficult. But have you heard of any ways or that states are trying to address all the various issues related to transportation that might be helpful?
Yeah, it's hard to cover in sort of the last 30 seconds of this call because I think that transportation continues to be one of the biggest challenges. I would say that I have a variety of we've done a few webinars specifically on this topic, in particular transportation and sort of what places have done related to transportation. So maybe the best thing that I can do, Nina, is share some of those with you and some of the tools and resources that we've developed. But I guess my overall takeaway in the last 10 seconds is that transportation is absolutely a challenge. It continues to be a challenge around the country. But on the other hand, it's not a completely insurmountable challenge. And I think even Colorado, just hearing that they were able to allocate, what was it, $2 million or $3 million into their budget, I think is a sign that it is possible to build the will to do this. And related to people not necessarily drawing down the allocated money, to me that's not a sign that the transportation isn't happening per se. It might just be that they haven't needed to, for whatever reason, tap into that budget. They might be using some other type of local budget. So that is my takeaway. But Tricia, I really encourage you. I have my information at the end of the PowerPoints. You have such astute questions, and it sounds like you're really sort of in the weeds on doing this work. And please reach out, anyone, Tricia or anyone. I'd love to hear from you. More than anything, we just love to hear about what people are doing around the country and share examples and share the good work.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time, Kristen, and that wonderful presentation. In the interest of time, I'd like to transition and share a few more pieces of information with you all. Remember that an archived copy will be available shortly online. To the Child Welfare Fellows, thank you for joining this webinar today. We'll be in contact in the future. If you have any remaining questions, feel free to connect with me or my other child welfare colleagues. You can see our contact information on the screen. As a friendly reminder, please keep in mind that NCSL is here for you. We would be very happy to provide you with additional research, resources, or follow-up information that may be helpful to you and the work you do in your state on foster care education. Please connect with us. Finally, at the conclusion of this webinar, a brief evaluation survey will pop up on your screen. Your feedback helps us in crafting the most meaningful program in the future. Please take a few moments and tell us what you thought about today's webinar. We value your feedback. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day.